raffle. We will have this clipboard at the back during the reception, and feel free to sign up. And have no hands, but without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest artist, Nick. Let's clap now. I have got no hands.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Nick Cutroneo, and I am thrilled to be here performing. I believe it's the first concert of the season. I'm going to start with a piece by Hector Villalobos. It's titled Choros Number 1. As I said before, the first piece is Choros #1 by Hector Villalobos, and for those who aren't familiar, choros is a Brazilian music style, actually the predecessor of bossa nova and the samba. Villalobos was one of the most important figures of 20th century classical guitar, and he really took it from trying to be something else, like trying to be a small orchestra or trying to emulate piano works, and made it its own thing, using the idiosyncrasies of the instrument. The next piece on the program that I'll be performing is a 5-movement suite by Maximo Daigo Pujol. This is Suite del Plata #1. The piece is an homage to Argentina, more specifically Buenos Aires and the Plata region of Buenos Aires. And this piece is really interesting because it kind of combines two different worlds, the worlds of South America and their folkloric music, as well as taking inspiration from Baroque dance suites and composers like Bach. So he presents this piece as a dance suite so each movement is a different Argentine dance. It opens with a prelude, followed by a tango, which is a pretty standard piece that we probably all know from Buenos Aires and from Argentina, followed by a milonga, which is essentially just a slow tango, then followed by a merga, and then ends with the candombe, both of which are more festive dances from the Carnival season in South America. Thank you. So I forgot to say this at the beginning of that set of pieces, but it's actually one of the EPs that I have released. And so if you're interested, the QR codes are out front for you. The next set of pieces are two pieces by Leo Brouwer. And Leo Brouwer is a composer that I have a certain connection with in terms of he actually attended the school that I went to for undergrad and graduate. He went to the Hart School of Music in West Hartford, Connecticut, way back I think in like 1959 or 1960. And he spent a year there, and he was actually a fellow student of the professor who I studied with, so they knew each other. And somewhere off in the multiverse, there is an alternate universe where Leo Brouwer got the instructor position at Hart, and my teacher became a world famous composer. But unfortunately, we don't live in that. We live in the world where Brouwer is a world famous composer. Brouwer comes originally from Cuba, and has written pieces in a variety of different styles over the course of, or periods of time over the course of his life. The second piece, Un Dia de Noviembre, which translates to A Day in November, is actually a piece that he wrote for a movie of the same name. And essentially the short story of this is that the main character suffers from a cerebral aneurysm and takes stock of his life. So he's essentially, facing mortality and kind of seeing if life was worth living and all of that stuff. And so the piece, I think, really eloquently reflects that mood. Interestingly enough, it's not really Brouwer's favorite composition, but like every guitarist loves it, and it's a really, really great piece. The second piece, Danza Characteristica, is a piece written from his earlier period back in the mid-50s. This piece is more representative of like a more rhythmic and angular sort of composition, very sort of mid-20th century music. And with my friends and colleagues, I kind of this is the precursors of like heavy metal music, like in really heavy metal music. And so there's like these weird influences that if you are into any of that other kind of music, you can kind of see it sort of harken back from here. The piece actually is inspired from a popular Cuban tune, which translates to Get Off the Sidewalk. And I've been on a journey trying to find a recording of this piece, of this song. And finally, maybe like a year or so ago, I actually stumbled across like a YouTube video of this song. Really bad recording, it's from like a vinyl LP that someone put online. And I don't quite see the connection, but apparently it's there. So A Day in November and Danza Characteristica.
This next piece is the last piece on the first half. About, I guess now, 15 years ago or so, I was on the internet, on YouTube, sort of looking at and discovering new music, and I happened to run across this composer, Marek Paznieczny. He's a Polish composer. He's born about 5 years earlier than I was, so a relatively same age. And he, at the time, was writing pieces that were dedicated to other famous classical guitarists. So he would write them in dedication to different performers. And so these pieces were wildly virtuosic and just insane compositions, and it's just the chops that this guy had is astounding. But then I came across this piece called Little Sonata, and it was so different from the rest of his music. And actually, he wrote this piece almost as a response to the pieces that he was writing at the time, where he was writing really complex, really musically dense and texturally dense music. This piece was much leaner, much more approachable from a listener standpoint and from a player standpoint. The piece is a 4-movement short sonata. The whole thing is like just under 7 minutes total. But it is a little different than what typical sonatas, 4-movement sonatas are. Usually you have a fast, slow, fast, and then maybe like a really fast ending. Whereas this sonata, he has the two outer movements are the big fast movements, and the 2 inner movements are really lyrical and slow, showcasing different sides of the guitar. It does a great job of blending tonal post-classical and neo-romantical styles, and was actually inspired, the title was inspired by Paul Hindemith's Klein Sonata for cello and piano. I think what was really interesting about this is that he wrote this on piano, for guitar, but wrote it on piano even though he's a guitarist himself. And so there's a lot of interesting chord structures from a guitarist standpoint that sort of we wouldn't normally
see a lot of times. And that, unique perspective was really helpful in that. But despite all of that, it plays really well on the guitar and is, I think, a really great piece. So this is the Little Sonata by Marek Poznieczny. So the concert program is titled Classical Reimagined. And I figured it's probably a title that I should explain a little bit of. So, back in, want the microphone? Absolutely, I can. Oh yeah. So back in 2022, I didn't stumble, but I sort of started getting into content creation and creating social media posts. I've been trying to do that for probably years, but finally something had taken off. And so I had posted a video of me playing the Bach Beret in E minor online, and it got a ridiculous amount of attention. Wasn't really expecting it. And it sort of turned into this whole thing, and it got me thinking of sort of how classical music, how classical guitar is kind of represented and how we see it in today's society and how we digest music. And there are guitarists out there, acoustic guitarists, that kind of really go all in on sort of blending styles and doing crossover styles and things like that. But what I found really interesting is the fact that my videos was just me sitting in a chair playing classical guitar. Like nothing different, nothing special, but somehow resonated with the online audience to where, you know, I've had hundreds of videos go viral and people really enjoying the content. I saw my Spotify streams increase. It was a really interesting phenomenon for me. And that got me thinking of, for me, the fact, I remember in college, we would have these classes like building a music career and communicating with an audience. And these classes, you know, were taught by usually whatever professor got the, you know, needed the extra credits to teach that semester or whatever. But it's very common for classical musicians to talk about how their audience is like evaporating, how nobody's interested in classical music, and then You have orchestras that put on pop concerts that try and sort of, get people interested in music, in classical music. But it's always, I feel, in a sense, it sort of does the music a disservice because we're kind of watering down that music. But what doing the social media content sort of taught me is that there are people who want to see this, but the audience is not I don't want to say normal, but not your typical music-going audience. And they consume music in a different way, and they're interested in music in a different way. And so that made me think about how I can present not only traditional repertoire, but more pieces that are probably inspired by classical music. And that led me to put together a Guitar Hero set. So before I was a classical guitarist, I was just like any other kid sitting in his bedroom playing electric guitar. And my big influences all cited classical music as some kind of influence for them. And so the three pieces that I put together here are actual acoustic solo pieces that these players wrote and recorded and released. So the first piece is titled 316. This is by Edward Van Halen of Van Halen. And this is, on every album Van Halen would release, they would have a song, like a 1-minute song or something that was like a guitar feature. And over the years, Eddie had done tons of different things, and this piece is really interesting because the story goes is that this piece existed while Eddie's son Wolfgang was in Valerie Bertinelli's stomach while she was pregnant. And he would lay the guitar on her stomach, and he would play this song to her and to their unborn son. And so it's dedicated and named after Wolfgang's birthday, March 16th, 1991. And it's off their For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album, their first album from the 90s. The second piece is written by Genesis's Steve Hackett. This piece, Horizons, is actually influenced or based even a little bit on Bach's Prelude from the First Cello Suite. And the story goes that apparently he heard Julian Bream performing the First Cello Suite in a concert, and he actually thought Bream wrote it, which is probably like a really great compliment to Julian Bream, but he's like, no, it was Bach. And it was the first track on the second side of Genesis's Foxtrot album. Serves as the opening to their big epic Supper's Ready. The final piece, written by Randy Rhoads for Ozzy Osbourne's debut album, Blizzard of Oz, is titled D, which is named and dedicated after his mom, Dolores, who was known as Dee. The really interesting thing about this piece is that he wrote it and was himself an aspiring classical guitarist. There are stories out there that after the second tour, maybe he would go on and he would study classical guitar at university. Not really sure how founded those stories are, but he certainly knew his classical music. And in fact, on the album Diary of a Madman, Randy borrowed a passage from Leo Brouwer's Sixth Study, and it was the inspiration for the opening of that. Brouwer had some thoughts on it, the fact that his composition was blatantly sort of taken, but I'm not going to serve into those rumors as they were. So this is my small little tribute to three guitarists who I'm hugely inspired by, 316, Horizons, and D. The next piece on the program is a piece written by my good friend Colin Britt. Colin and I actually went to college together. We were in the same class, and being a composition major in college, everybody was asking him to write pieces. That's sort of like the thing. I always sort of put off asking him to write something because he was always someone who would say yes to everything and then try and figure out how to make things work. But in 2017, I was asked to do a artist residency at my former high school in New Jersey. And at that time, Colin was also living in New Jersey, actually teaching down the road from where I grew up. Really weird circumstances in terms of like how would you wind up getting there? It's really odd. And so I was slated to do a concert in 2018 for my former school. And I said, Colin, you are literally half a mile down the road from where I'm gonna do the concert. Would you be willing to write a piece for me? And he said, sure. So he wrote this piece titled Staggered Breathing. For those who are familiar with choir music and maybe a little bit of choir technique, stagger breathing is a choral technique which creates the illusion of continuous sustained melody and line. And Colin used that idea as inspiration for this piece. During the time when he wrote this, at the time, there was a lot of news that we were seeing each day that he felt was too much to bear. And he thought that also this stagger breathing could be a metaphor for being able to take sort of one day at a time and just sort of move at different paces for one another. Finally, I've asked Colin about this, and he denies it, flat out denies it. But there, to me, is like a weird sense of like minimalism in the piece, with these long lines that sort of have these small changes as an evolution as it goes through. He says it's not, but I hear it. So it's a wonderful piece. I love having it in my repertoire. I hope you enjoy Staggered Breathing. The next piece on the program is a piece titled For Sylvie. This was written by Malika Fitzhugh, who I have the honor of having here this afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out. This is one of a few studies that she wrote for some of her guitar students, and what I really appreciate and enjoy is, I would say, more of the, we'll say, forward thinking of how the piece is written. It would be really easy to write something, you know, relatively straightforward, but Malika does a great job of having really interesting rhythms and harmonies for a student piece, for a piece for a student. And I always appreciate it when composers write music and have complex ideas, even in a student piece, so that way students can appreciate creating something rather than just sort of, I call it pushing buttons on the guitar. So the piece, to me, has like this ambient sort of like lo-fi quality to it. I've been getting into a whole lot of like lo-fi playlists on Spotify and stuff like that just as I'm doing work, because it's the only kind of music that I can listen to and not like put all of my attention on. I can't listen to music when I'm doing work, because I just listen to the music and then 2 hours goes by and then I haven't done anything. So, but this is a harmonically rich piece and really develops over time and uses several different techniques on the guitar, which is really great. I sort of say that it kind of has study vibes to it. So I hope you enjoy For Sylvie. So to continue with the Guitar Heroes theme, Francisco Tárrega is probably one of the most well-known classical guitarists of the late 19th and early 20th century. This piece, Recuerdos de la Alhambra, is a piece that utilizes a technique called tremolo. And a tremolo is where guitarists get to be a little bit like magicians. So unlike an instrument like, say, a violin or a wind instrument or even a singer, where you can hold a line, you can hold a note, and you can sustain it, and you can crescendo, you can decrescendo, you can shape this single note that just kind of resonates. The guitar essentially does pluck, and then boop, it just sort of plops and dies off, tapers off. When we have a hall that has wonderful reverberation, when we have a really great instrument, we can kind of blur that a little bit. But tremolo is a technique that guitarists, composers, and guitarists use to create the illusion of a sustaining singing line. And this is probably one of the most famous tremolo pieces there are. So I hope you enjoy Recuerdos de la Alhambra. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining me this afternoon. I hope you had a wonderful time. And thank you again for the free concert series for having me. It's been a wonderful afternoon here. The last two pieces on the program are actually from my debut album, Emergence. Physical copies out front, and then also you could purchase downloads as well. These two pieces sort of close out the idea of my Guitar Hero set. Andrew York is a composer based on the West Coast. For 16 years, he was 1/4 of the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet, and Andy has written many, many wonderful pieces for the classical guitar. The first piece, Waiting for Dawn, is a piece that I stumbled on, I don't even know how many years ago, but I purchased the music and then it was kind of sitting in my my stack of music. And then there was one September, if I remember correctly, it actually is probably the September that I got married, funny enough. There was like a hurricane a week before, and then so my wife was out of town, and it was just me in the house, and we had no power, and so I was just reading through some music to occupy myself. And I found this piece, Waiting for Dawn, and I started playing through. I'm like, oh, this is really pretty. My friend and I have an ongoing contest of who can play the prettiest Andrew York song, and so this one kind of won out for a while, and then he found another one that was really gorgeous too, so then it just got constantly back and forth. The second piece, Emergence, is described by Andy himself as like the most virtuosic song that he's ever written. Essentially what I want you to think of is like if Eddie Van Halen and Michael Hedges, the fingerstyle guitarist, and Muse sort of came together. Muse is like a early 2000s rock band. They came together and they wrote a song together. This would be that song, and it happens to be on classical guitar. This piece is just a wonderful piece of music, and I'm so thrilled to play it for you. So I hope you enjoy Waiting for Dawn and Emergence.
just want to thank you all again for coming. Thank you for the live streamers for watching and joining us online as well. And I want to encourage everyone who's actually here to enjoy. Go talk to Nick about, ask him questions, and enjoy the reception. And again, if you need to find me for a donation, I am always available and down for that. Please mark your calendars for the next concerts and spread the word. And thanks again. And let's just give him one more round of applause.